Thank you. Our next panel is entitled Security, Conflict, and Stabilization in Iraq and the Region. Our moderator, Dr. Dov Zachaim, Senior Advisor, Center for Strategic and International Studies, and former U.S. Undersecretary of Defense. Go ahead, Dr. Zav.
Well, thanks very much. And we're starting late, but we're going to finish in time because you're all hungry. So I'll tell you that right now. This is a very interesting panel. I was involved with Iraq when it started in 2003. And so many of the issues that we'll be discussing are things that I'm actually quite familiar with. Some of the members of my panel here, and I'll give you all their backgrounds and biographies, some would like to make statements at the beginning, and some would simply like to answer questions. So we're going to do it. I'm simply trying to make everybody happy. So if you want to give a statement first, you can give a statement first. And before each person speaks, I'll give you a little bit of introduction. So I know Professor Holmes wants to say something. So let me give you an introduction to Professor Holmes. She's a public policy fellow at the Wilson Center in Washington, D.C. She earned a doctorate from Johns Hopkins, which is, in case you don't know, one of the most prestigious universities in the United States. She's been an associate professor at the American University in Cairo, a visiting scholar at Harvard University, Brown University. I didn't go to either of them, but I won't hold it against her. She's written a couple of very important books, one on the Egyptian military and the other on American bases in Turkey and Germany. And for that, at least two of those bases, I get the blame because in the 1980s, I recommended we have those bases. And she's done the first ever survey of Syrian defense forces, which is, as you can imagine, not an easy thing to do. So, Professor Holmes, over to you, please.
Thank you very much for that kind introduction. I'm really delighted to be back here after attending the Suli Forum in 2019. I'm thrilled to see people again in person, to meet old friends, and to meet many new people as well. I'd like to thank Dr. Barham and the entire team at AUIS for bringing us all together for such important discussions. And I especially appreciate it, as Dov mentioned, I previously taught at the American University in Cairo, and I remember in 2019 already when I attended the Suli Forum how impressed I was by the openness of the discussions, the the honesty with which very difficult and sensitive topics were being discussed, and that's truly something valuable that we should not take for granted. Academic freedom does not just benefit us academics or students, it benefits everyone in society. Economic innovation depends on academic freedom. Economic diversification depends on academic freedom. Accountability for corruption also depends on academic freedom. And so it's a public good that we are able to enjoy academic freedom here at AUIS, so I thank you all for that. I'll just make two brief comments since we're pressed for time. On Iraq, I'd like to just address the situation in Sinjar. And these are not just my personal opinions or reflections, but based on conversations I've had with many people from Sinjar, including Yazidis in the diaspora. The previous government signed what they called a Sinjar agreement that I believe was very well-intentioned. Obviously, the situation in Sinjar is very complex, as we all here know, but they should have perhaps called it the Erbil-Baghdad Agreement, because a major shortcoming of that agreement is that the local community in Sinjar, as well as the Yazidi diaspora, were not properly consulted when that agreement was signed. And that's really a non-starter. You can't make a Sinjar agreement without consulting the people of Sinjar. And so my humble suggestion for the new government would be to acknowledge those shortcomings and mistakes and to start again to convene a new round of conversations with the local stakeholders, the local people in Sinjar, as well as Yazidis that are still displaced, still living in tents, and the diaspora community, to take their concerns into consideration and to make a new agreement, call it the Sinjar 2 agreement or the Sinjar 2023 agreement, but to essentially start over, because I think that would be important in order to gain the trust of the people in Sinjar to move forward. Secondly, regarding the Sinjar agreement, the plan was made to create a local police force. There are more than 30 different armed actors in Sinjar, as I'm sure everyone here knows. And the idea of having a local police force was welcomed by many in Sinjar and the Yazidi community. However, of the 2,500 names that were put forth and who have been vetted, a statement put out by, I believe, 26 different Yazidi organizations and leaders, basically, in addition to criticizing the Sinjar agreement, said that 2,500 is not enough. They actually recommended 9,000. Now, I'm not going to make specific recommendations like that, but I would urge the those who are going to be responsible for this to also consider including women in that local police force. There are already local Yazidi women in Sinjar who are trained, who also took up arms after 2014, after the genocide, to defend Sinjar. And so you already actually have trained Yazidi local women in Sinjar who would be able to take part in this local police force. And the women, peace, and security is something that is on the agenda. Also, the NATO mission here in Iraq is my understanding, and so that's something that I think should be taken into consideration moving forward. And I would be happy to also speak about the situation in Syria, but I'll leave it at that for now. Thank you.
Thanks very much. As I go down the line, I think the next person who actually wants to speak before I ask some questions is Sarhang Hamas Saeed, and I'll give you a little bit of his background. He directs Middle East programs at the United States Institute of Peace and actually worked there some years before that, from 2011 to 2016, I believe. He's also worked with the Atlantic Council, which is one of the prestigious think tanks in Washington, at the Rafiq Hariri Center, actually was on an important task force on the future of Iraq, and also a working group on rebuilding societies. He lectures at the American Foreign Service Institute. He lectures on both ISIS and challenges to governance in Iraq, issues as well in Syria, Yemen, and elsewhere. So I think he's got a lot to offer us. And Sarhang, over to you.
Thank you. Good afternoon. It is a true honor to be here, Dr. Parham, Your Excellency, to be here with the distinguished guests, this distinguished panel, this distinguished institution, the students, the faculty, everybody here, everybody watching. It's a true honor for me. It is an emotional day, being March 16, Halabja Day, being an emotional month, the uprising in 1991. It is an emotional place for me because this area was a village where I come from that Anfal destroyed, so it is an emotional moment. I speak today from a personal experience, but also a professional as a peace builder, with an emphasis on the latter. And I would like to tackle in the time that I have the mindset, the capital, and actions for peace versus the mindset, the capital, and actions for violence. And for colleagues who are interpreting by capital, I mean Ra's Mal, Sarmaya, not Paytaht or Al-Asima. I remember a day where my first vision, if I let myself go back, I see an Iranian plane bombarding this city not too far from here. I remember the airplanes, the helicopters landing in the military base downtown the city. resupplying front lines against fighting the Kurdish Peshmerga or the front line of the Iran-Iraq war. I remember not about probably a kilometer or two from here, a military base called Ma'askar Salam. There was nothing, Camp Peace, there was nothing peaceful about it. So reflecting at the big frame that this conference is trying to tackle, we can count, depending how you count, about 8 wars in this country, in this region that Iraq was party to. So post-2003, we are not talking anymore about Iraq invading another country, being in war with a neighboring country, and that is an important progress as change to take note of. Second, the second thing I want to tackle is the mindset for violence. War against neighbors, chemical attack in Halabja, genocide of Anfal. Fast forward to the mindset of that perpetrated Camp Spiker massacre that perpetrated the genocide against the Yazidis and Kojo. The mindset of violence continues. If we look at some of the killings that happen in Diyala, in certain parts of Salah ad-Din, in certain parts of Anbar, in certain parts of Nineveh, so mindset of killing, the mindset of violence is there, contained, but is still there. When an entire family is killed, women, children, for no fault of their own, that is a mindset that is dangerous that we need to keep an eye on. So let me switch quickly to the mindset of and capital for peace. I already said a big one, the constitution of Iraq, the political class do not want to wage wars with the neighbors. They want peace and integration with the neighbors. So that is an important piece. Second, Iraq's civil society has grown. That in the 2012, 2013, 2017 timeframe, they helped the Iraqi society not to slide back to the sectarian violence that we have seen in 2007, 2008, 2009. And I think it's an important point. And the protest movement, that was a peaceful transformation of the Iraqi society. Youth who were paralyzed, scared of the system, now out there asking their public officials peacefully to do better. So, even though heinous violence was directed at them, lots of them were killed, over 20,000 were injured. Again, the spirit of civil society, the capital of peace, did not let that to slide into violence. I think that is an important piece of. So I would like to conclude by saying confidently, and for those who want practical examples, you are welcome to attend the next session where I will be chairing a roundtable on 5 years after ISIS. Well, I'll go into the details of some of this stuff. But I would like to conclude with a positive note that I strongly believe, based on specific examples and case studies, that the capital for peace, the mindset of peace, the capital of peace, the action for peace is increasing in this country, in the Middle East region. Yes, a lot of noise and violence takes that over, but I think the capital of peace is there and strong. If we look at the incidents between October 2021, right after the elections, and October 2022, when the government started to form, any of those incidents, attack on the house of the prime minister, targeting the prime minister, other incidents could have triggered a civil war in Iraq a few years earlier. That tells you the mindset of crisis management, the capital for peace is there. My last note, please, for the political class of this country, do reflect on the existential crisis that this country went through. 1/3 of the country lost to ISIS. The Kurdistan region feeling forced to go for a referendum as a way to solve this problem. The protest movement, the youth in the middle and the south of the country going out and thinking that is the only way to change. Please heed the lessons from those experiences so that we do not repeat. And my last word, I promise.
You better keep it.
Yes, I keep it. People talk about energy, renewable energy. The renewable energy of this country is the youth. And we heard today, more than 1 million plus rising every year. The renewable energy in this country, if you want to invest, yes, in other sources of energy that do about climate change, but also let's change the political climate. And youth is the energy for that climate change. Thank you.
I think it's very important to hear optimistic messages because if you don't have optimism about the future, you've got a real problem about the present. And so that's a very important message. And you did talk about the impact of ISIS and how you've gotten past that. And I'd like to turn around to His Excellency Ahmad al-Shatri, who is now head of the National Security Service, about a year now, I think, a little over a year, 2 years now. Yeah, that's right, we're in 23, I'm getting too old. And you were Undersecretary before that for the National Security Agency. And my understanding is that maybe your primary mission is reintegrating the ISIS folks into society in a way that would, in effect, bring to fruition the things that Sarhang was talking about. So perhaps you could give us a sense of how things are going in that regard.
شكرا جزيلا. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. ابتداء نتقدم بالشكر الجزيل إلى فخامة السيد الرئيس الدكتور برهم صالح وإلى إدارة الجامعة الأمريكية لهذه الدعوة الكريمة. وقبل أن أجيب على السؤال أود أن أنوه النقطة أشارت إليها الدكتورة هولمز بخصوص اتفاق سنجار. كوني أنا كنت ممثل الحكومة العراقية وأنا من وقع هذا الاتفاق نيابة عن الحكومة العراقية مع حكومة الإقليم. الحقيقة أشارت إلى نقطتين. النقطة الأولى موضوع المتطوعين عددهم 2500 وأن هذا العدد غير كافي. الحقيقة يعني طيات وتفاصيل هذا الاتفاق كثيرة. ال 2500 شرطي هم إضافة إلى شرطة سنجار اللي تقريبا عددهم 8000 حاليا. فال 2500 هي فقط لإرضاء المكونات الموجودة في داخل سنجار وإرضاء أيضا النازحين الموجودين في مخيمات النزوح في إقليم كردستان لغرض إشراكهم في إعادة الاستقرار في سنجار. وهذا العدد هو ليس شرطة سنجار الكلي، هم تعزيز فقط ولغرض إشراك أبناء المناطق في سنجار، أبناء المكونات المختلفة في عملية إعادة الاستقرار إلى سنجار. الموضوع الثاني اللي أشارت إلى الدكتورة هو موضوع إهمال أهل سنجار في هذا الاتفاق. طبعا هذا أيضا الموضوع حقيقة نحن قبل أن نوقع الاتفاق أمضينا حوالي سنتين، أكثر من سنتين في التواصل مع جميع شرائح ومكونات سنجار وأبلغناهم بوجود اتفاق سيتم إبرامه مع حكومة الإقليم وحاولنا جاهدين أن نرضي جميع هذه الشرائح، ولكن عملية إرضاء كل المكونات عملية مستحيلة نظراً لكثرة التفاصيل والتعقيدات بسبب الأزمة اللي موجودة وأزمة الثقة اللي موجودة بين المجاميع. يعني ممكن أن نتصور أن هناك 4 أشخاص في سنجار لديهم مقر ولديهم اسم ولديهم مطالب محددة. 4 أشخاص في سنجار يكونون منظمة ولديهم مطالب تتقاطع مع مطالب المجاميع الأخرى. فإرضاء جميع يعني المجاميع في سنجار هذا عملية في غاية الصعوبة. أعود إلى سؤالك دكتور. طبعا العراق خرج من أتون حرب كبيرة مع داعش، حرب حقيقة كان هو الواجهة الأمامية للمجتمع الدولي والعالم الحر في هذه المواجهة، والعراق دفع ثمن غالي وكبير في هذه المواجهة. نعم نحن استطعنا أن ننتصر على داعش عسكريا، ونحن الآن في طريقنا أن ننتصر على داعش أمنيا واستخباريا. داعش باختصار الآن لا يتجاوز عدد أفرادها في العراق 500 عنصر فعال على أكبر التقادير. استطاعت الأجهزة الأمنية العراقية والقوات المسلحة وأيضا من خلال دعم التحالف الدولي أن توجه ضربات كبيرة وتفكك هذه الشبكات في مناطق مختلفة. وأصبح تواجد داعش الآن هو عبارة عن تواجد على شكل مجاميع صغيرة في مغارات وكهوف ومناطق مستعصية جغرافيا. إذا نظرنا إلى حجم ونوع العمليات التي قامت بها داعش خلال السنة الماضية لنجدها هي عبارة عن عمليات كر وفر تستهدف بها مناطق رخوة لا يمكنها أن تسيطر على أي منطقة من مناطق العراق وتستمر في ما يسمى عسكريا بمسك الأرض سرعان ما تعالجها القوات الأمنية العراقية. تواجدهم مثل ما أشرنا في مناطق نائية للأسف الشديد لا زالوا يستفيدون من بعض التناقضات، وخصوصا موضوع العلاقة بين القوات الاتحادية وقوات البشمركة في الإقليم، وهذا ما نسعى إلى إغلاقه تماما ومن خلال التنسيق المشترك مع الأخوة في الإقليم. طبعا إذا أنا أشرت إلى أنه إحنا انتهينا من داعش عسكريا وعلى وشك أن ننتهي من داعش أمنيا واستخباريا، ولكن تبقى هناك تحديات كبيرة وهي آثار داعش اللي من ضمنها التطرف، لأنه لا ننسى أنه داعش استمر حوالي 3 سنوات وكانت لديه مناهج دراسية تلقى على الأطفال والطلبة، وهذا حتما ترك أثر من خلال التعبئة العقائدية ومن خلال فكر داعش. هذا يجب أن نلتفت إليه ويجب أن تكون هناك برامج كفيلة بمعالجته. أيضا واحدة من آثار داعش الموجودة الآن هو مخيم الهول. مخيم الهول يبعد حوالي 13 كيلومتر فقط عن الحدود العراقية السورية، وفي هذا المخيم يتواجد الآن أكثر من 60,000 إنسان يعيشون تحت تعبئة فكرية كاملة لداعش. يعني أستطيع القول، وأنا زرت هذا المخيم أكثر من 7 مرات، أستطيع القول أنه داعش استطاعت من خلال عدم وجود قبضة أمنية على هذا المخيم استطاعت أن تفرض إرادتها وفكرها وتكون ما يشبه الدويلة في هذه المنطقة. هؤلاء 60,000 نصفهم تقريبا من العراقيين، وأيضا هؤلاء العراقيين تشبعوا وتم تعبئتهم سواء بشكل إرادي أو لا إرادي بأفكار داعش. طبعا الحكومة العراقية بادرت ووضعت برامج لإعادة هؤلاء العراقيين، ونحن في صدد العمل على هذا الموضوع. نقلنا لحد الآن ما يقارب 2500 عائلة بمجموع ما يقارب 5000 إنسان إلى هذا 7000 إلى هذا المخيم. وفي هناك عمل مؤسساتي عراقي من أجهزة أمنية ومن وزارة هجرة ومن وزارات ساندة لتأهيل هؤلاء المواطنين وإعادتهم إلى مناطقهم الأصلية أو مناطق بديلة. وأعتقد أنه تجربة العراق في هذا المجال رائدة على الرغم من كونها محفوفة بالتحديات. فأستطيع القول أنه تجربة العراق في التعامل مع مخلفات داعش هي تجربة جيدة، ولكن تحتاج إلى دعم كبير. هناك فكرة مطروحة الآن على الجهات العليا، هي فكرة إنشاء مركز وطني لمكافحة التطرف مثل ما معمول به في بعض الدول التي عانت من الجماعات الإرهابية. هذا المركز من شأنه أنه يقلل من الفكر المتطرف لداعش. بالإضافة إلى ذلك طبعا عملية القضاء على التطرف ومعالجة التطرف هي ليست مسؤولية الأجهزة الأمنية لوحدها، بل يجب أن تكون هناك جهود متضافرة تتمثل بتسليط الضوء على هذه الظاهرة، وأنه تكون هناك عملية تقبل مجتمعي ومصالحة مجتمعية. مثل ما معروف أنه العراق فيه ثقافة عشائرية، وواجهتنا مشكلة كبيرة في بعض المناطق حتى بعد إدخال هذه العوائل إلى برامج مكافحة التطرف والتأهيل النفسي. ترفض المجتمعات المحلية عودة هؤلاء إلى مناطقهم بدوافع الثأر وبدوافع عشائرية. فطبعا هناك تحديات اجتماعية وتحديات كبيرة في هذا الشأن، والعراق لا يزال يطلب مساعدة المجتمع الدولي على الرغم من وجود هذه المساعدات، ولكنها لا تلبي احتياجات العراق حقيقة لكون هنا هذه مشكلة كبيرة. لا زال هناك مخيمات للنزوح في إقليم كردستان ومنطقة الجدعة في محافظة الموصل. هذه أيضا هي للأسف الشديد بؤر يمكن أن يستغلها داعش ويأثر على الناس، لأنه هم الطبقات الأكثر تعرضا للتوجيه الفكري والتوجيه المعنوي وثقافة داعش. كذلك لدينا جهود ممتازة جدا في التواصل مع الأجهزة الأمنية النظيرة في الإقليم من خلال القيام ببرامج مشتركة وعمليات مشتركة أيضا تستهدف هذه الجماعات بهدف القضاء عليها. شكرا جزيلا.
Well, thank you, Your Excellency, and I think many people would share your view that you've got to stamp out extremism. You can't let pockets still exist because it spreads like a cancer. So the coordination on dealing with this is exceedingly important. I'd like now to turn to Staff Major General Omar Salih Hassan, who was a leading Peshmerga commander in fighting Daesh from Jalala to Khazar, actually. I know that my country was supporting the Peshmerga for a very long time, and certainly when I was in government, we continued to do that, and since I've left government, we continued to do that. General Omar is both an academic and a military commander and leader, played a major role in reorganizing the 70 forces and preparing them for transfer under the Ministry of Peshmerga Affairs. And since he started in his current position, he's coordinating with the Iraqi forces and, of course, the international coalition. And my question to you, General, is simply this. Do you feel that you're receiving sufficient financial support for what you need, whether it's acquiring weapons, whether it's maintaining the weapons you have? Are there shortfalls? And how could you meet the challenges that you've got?
زۆر سپاسی هاوکارانم کە بەشدارن لەم دیدارە لەگەڵما و ئەمەوێت سەرەتا سپاسی بەڕێز دکتۆر بەرهەم و زانکۆی ئەمریکی بکەین بۆ ڕێخستنی ئەو دیدارە و ئەوەی مای خۆشبەختیە لەسەر جەمە ئەو دیدارانەی کە ڕێکخراوە لە سلێمانی و لە زانکۆی ئەمریکی بابەتێک تەوەرێکی گرنگ تەوەرێکی ئەستیارەویش بابەتی پێشمەرگە و دۆخی ئەمنی ئەخرێتە ناو تەوەرەکانی ئەم دیدارەوە و هەر لێرەشەوە مەوێت سەری ڕێز و نەوازش بۆ قوربانیانی هەڵەبجە دابنوێنم کە ئەمڕۆ یادی کیمیابارانکردنی هەڵەبجەیە و ئەوەی برای بەڕێزم کاک سەرهەنگ ئاماژەی پێدا لە کیمیابارانکردنی هەڵەبجە لە ڕاپەڕین لە ئەنفال و لە پرۆسەی ئازادی عێراق و لە شەڕی داعش دیار ئەمە هەموو پێشمەرگە قوربانی داوە و خوێنی بەخشیەوە توانم بڵێم هەزاران پێشمەرگە گیانی خۆی فیدا کرد لەو پێناوە و ئەوەی مایەی شانازیشە کە پێشمەرگە توانم بڵێم
to have it work. Okay.
دیارە پێشمەرگە هەموو ئەزانن هێزێکی نیشتمانی هێزێکی قوربانی دەر لە پێناوی ئازادی ملت و ئەوەی شانازیە لای ئێمە هەموو کاتێ پێشمەرگە بەرگریکاری خاکەکەی بووە و هیچ کاتێ هەڕەشە و مەترسی نەبووە بۆ دەر و دراوسەکان و سەر هیچ نەتەوەیچکە و ئەوەی جەنابەت باست کرد بۆ ڕێخستنەوەی هێزی پێشمەرگە و ئەو تەحەدیانەی کە لە بەردەممانایەوە ئەو پێداویستیانەی کە هەیە بەڵە دیارە ئێمەزانین پێشمەرگە لە ڕابردووە هێزێک بووە هیچ پاڵپشتێکی نەبووە تەنها خۆی و ئەو تفەنگەی کە لە شەڕەکان ناتوانم وەکو بڵێم دەستکەوتێک لە دوشمنەکان بەدەستیەناوە توانێتی شەڕی پێ بکە و دوشمنەکەی پێ بە دەربناو بێڕوخێنێت بەڵام دۆخی ئێستا خۆمانەزانین جیاوازترە لە جاران دۆخێکە پێویستە کە هێزی پێشمەرگەیش وەکو هێزەکانی دنیا جێی تموحی ملەتەکە بێ هێزێکی مەشق پێکراو بێ هێزێکی پرچەک بێ هێزێک بێ جێگای مانەوە و نیشتەجێبوونی هەبێ هێزێک بێ بەشێک ئەگەر نەڵێن هەمووشی لە تەکنۆلۆژیای لە بەردەسا بێ دیارە ئەو ئیمکانیاتە مادیانەی کە هەیە خۆمانەزانین لە هەرێمی کوردستان بەشی هەموو ئەمانە ناکە بەڵام هاوپەیمانەکان بە تایبەتی وڵاتی ئەمریکا کە لە پرۆسەی شەڕی داعش کە پشتیوانی پێشمەرگەی کرد بڕێک پارەی خستە بەردەستی پێشمەرگەوە ئێسێش ئەو هاوکاریە بەردەوامی هەیە بەڵام بەڕاو قەنەعەتی ئێمە ئەم پارە بەشی ئەوە ناکە کە بتوانین بڵێن ئێمە هێزی پێشمەرگە بە باشی ڕێکەخەینەوە و ئەمە ئاماژەش بۆ بدەم پرۆسەی ڕێخستنی پێشمەرگە پرۆسەیەکی تازە نییە مێژوویەکی دەیان ساڵەی هەیە هەر لێ پێکەنانی یەکەم کابینەی حکوومەتی پەرلەمانی هەرێمی کوردستان یاسایەکەیە بۆ ئەوەی کە هێزەکان بە نیشتمانی بکرێن و هێزی پێشمەرگا ڕێک بخرێ بەڵام دیارە دۆخەکان بۆ تەحەدیانەی کە لە بەردەما بۆ چەند جارێک بربەستی بۆم پرۆسەیە دروست کردووە و ئێستش ئەم پرۆسەیە بەردەوامی هەیە و بەڵە جارێکی کە ئێڵێمەوە ئەو ئیمکانیاتە مادیەی کە هەیە پێویستی بە زیاترە پێویستی بە دەعم و پشتیوانی دەوڵەتی اتحادی عێراقیشە چووکە بیرمان نەچێت لە دەستورە ئەمە چەسپیوە هێزی پێشمەرگە بەشێکە لە سیستەمی بەرگری عێراقی بۆیە پێویستە عێراقیش لەم ڕۆوە کۆمەک و هاوکاری پێشمەرگە بکات.
Well, thank you. Let me now turn to a good friend of mine, actually, Professor Joseph Bahout, who now directs the Samis Faris Institute at the American University of Beirut and studied economics there and then got his doctorate at Sciences Po in Paris, which I won't hold against him because I went to Oxford, so whatever. And he's been a non-resident fellow of the Carnegie Endowment. And given your experience and your knowledge of things in Lebanon, which isn't exactly the quietest place in the world. We had a recent visit here by two very top American officials who are very close to our president, Brett McGurk, who many people here know, and Amos Hochstein. And they are trying to work reconciliation here. These two people just worked a deal in the Mediterranean. Are there any lessons learned? What can be applied here to benefit from what's been going on there and their capability? And more generally, can there be some lessons from the Lebanese experience that would help here in the KRG?
Okay, thank you very much, Dov. And thank you, Dr. Barham, for having us. It's always a pleasure to come back here, and thank you, President Ferguson, for this. I'm always moved to come back to this university because, being at AUB, I can foresee the very bright future that this institution will have in the coming century, probably. Since I'm the last man standing between you and lunch, you'll give me 1 hour to answer your question. So, no, very quickly. Look, in fact, you said Lebanon is not the quietest place on earth. Fortunately, luckily, it is still a little bit peaceful. However, it is completely crumbling. It is a total collapse. And I think that this was already, unfortunately, but also fortunately, paradoxically, one of the helping factors behind the maritime deal that you are mentioning. The fact that Lebanon is today in dire need of financing, in dire need of a sort of opening to its economic crisis and financial crisis. Not only Lebanon, but all the factions in Lebanon, within which the usual spoiler, which is, as we know, Hezbollah. So everybody has a vested interest in trying to find a solution. This is one aspect. I don't know how much it is replicable here in Lebanon. The second one, and I think that your friend Amos Hochstein, who was the main crafter of this deal, I think really displayed a very wide range of inventivity. Not only because of the context, but also of the method that he used. And I think that probably it's a cliche, but it applied very well in the Lebanese case, which is to find the best win-win situation. I think that, of course, any deal is not perfect because someone has to concede, but in Lebanon, the win-win was quite striking between foes that really were very far apart, because let's talk frankly. I mean, the deal was partly between Lebanon and Israel, but it was mainly between Hezbollah and Israel. And it was somewhere, and this is something I've felt. I had talks with Hochstein and the Lebanese negotiators. Part of this deal is also a confidence-building measure between Hezbollah and the US themselves. I think it showed that with a certain paradigm in mind, and I think that the Biden administration has this paradigm in mind. You can do business with people with whom you don't have forcibly something deep to do politically. Which leads me to a third consideration, though, if you allow me, and this is maybe wider than Lebanon. It has to do maybe with this panel. If you look at the state of the world today and the region, you have a strong paradox. You have a very fluctuant system, international system, which we still don't know how to define. It's not exactly multipolar. It's definitely not bipolar. It is apolar or non-polar. I don't know. But there are a lot of things happening there, and there's no, let's say, rule that is guiding regional files on that. This is why I think, and these 2 days were very rich on that level, this is why you can see that within the Middle East, you have a lot of countries and actors that are looking in a very transactional way, I wouldn't say cynical way, for insurance policies by undertaking short-lived, punctual, really issue-based, small transactional deals. And I think that the maritime deal between Lebanon and Israel is one of these deals. It shows that if you leave the big issues apart, if you compartmentalize the conflicts and put, let's say, the deep contentious issues for a further stage, you can reach certain deals that could be really feasible and winnable for both parties. Now, a last point, and here I don't know if Iraq is a comparison. The Lebanese-Israeli deal wouldn't have been achieved also without the strong intervention, positive intervention of other less seen parties that were, of course, some of them state actors, like France and Qatar at some point, but also of non-state actors. And for the first time, maybe in this region, when we talk about non-state actors, we don't always talk about malevolent non-state actors, but also a positive non-state actor. In that case, it was a firm, it was the giant Total Energy that was really key in handling and in finalizing this deal by maybe solving issues that states could not solve. I give the example. There is a common part of the oil field, which is Qana, which is shared between Lebanon and Israel. It was impossible on purely international law terms to divide this field. Total made a very inventive construction with Hochstein, which was, okay, Total will drill, and the part of benefit that is due to Israel will not be paid by Lebanon, meaning by Hezbollah, because it's impossible, but it will be paid without knowing from the Lebanese government, supposedly, to Israel as dividends. So this kind of very inventive models that only, I think, a deal maker like Hochstein or others, with the intervention of non-state actors that are business, let's say, oriented, I think is very important. Now, of course, and this is my last word, Lebanon and Iraq have a lot of things in common. Many things are comparable, many good things, but also many bad things, and we've heard some this morning in the panel on corruption. When Bilal Wahab was using the term muhassasa, I don't know who invented the term, if it's Lebanon or Iraq, but we use it also in Lebanon. I hope and really I pray. Okay, yeah, you learned that. Yeah, so I really hope and pray that the dividends of this oil revenue, if it happens, and it won't happen before 3 to 4 to 5 years, won't be again also put in this, let's say, basket of muhassasa, of wealth sharing and of corruption. And the danger here is that, let's say, the fantasizing in Lebanon over this revenue and these dividends is today bears a risk, which is to kick once again, because it's a very Lebanese tradition, the can down the road and forego the very necessary reforms that this country has to undergo on the political, on the economic, on the administrative level, exactly like Iraq. So the last lesson would be, don't live on the oil rent fantasy and dream, and do whatever you have to do today before tomorrow, because whatever the oil rent it will not really substitute for the real reforms and the good governance that you have to have.
Well, I'll take the optimistic part of what you said, because just like Sarhang talked about, looked optimistic, I mean, what you're really saying is with creativeness, we can solve a lot of problems that we might not think in the conventional way, and I think that's very important. I'm only allowed time to take one question, so I'm going to take the first question that I was sent here and ask any one of you who wants to comment on it. And this was, what kind of impact would the recent deal between Saudi Arabia and Iran have on Iraq and the overall safety of the region? I mean, after all said and done, this all started with Iraq. And I think Iraq deserves a lot of credit, because it's very hard to work deals like this, keep them quiet, keep everybody participating, nobody walking away from the table, and then you don't even get credit for all the hard work you did. So anybody who wants to comment on that, because it is important for the future of Iraq and for the future of Iraq's role in this entire region, which we've heard about a lot over the last day and a half. So, Sarhang, you have a comment.
I'd be happy to, but I want to first defer to Mr. Shatri if he wants to tackle. I don't mean to put you on the spot, but if you want, I will defer to you first, sir.
Would you like to?
Yeah, please.
Good.
طبعا العراق بسبب الظروف اللي حدثت بعد 2003 للأسف الشديد كان ساحة لصراع الإيرادات، وخصوصا إيرادات الدول الجوار. نعم، أثرت هذه الصراعات كثيرا على الوضع الأمني العراقي وعلى الاستقرار في العراق. والحقيقة يعني العراق يأمل من هذا الاتفاق أن يكون هناك نوع من إبعاد تجليات الصراع الإيراني السعودي عن الأرض العراقية، بل على العكس، مثل ما هو معروف العراق لعب دور كبير في هذا الاتفاق، وكان هناك جولة من المفاوضات معلنة وغير معلنة في بغداد بين الجانب الإيراني والجانب السعودي. مؤخرا يعني صار الاتفاق في الصين وبرعاية صينية، هو حقيقة يعني نهاية مطاف لهذه المفاوضات التي حدثت في بغداد، وقسم منها حدث في سلطنة عمان مثل ما هو معروف. العراق يطمح دائما أن يكون جزء من منظومة أمنية إقليمية، ونحن نؤمن يعني في إدارة الملف الأمني بالعراق أنه لا يمكن اجتزاء الأمن والنظر إلى الأمن في العراق كحالة منفردة بدون أن تكون هناك منظومة أمنية إقليمية وبيئة آمنة إقليميا. العراق لن يكون أمنه متكاملا. أضرب مثل واحد، ملف المخدرات تأتي من أفغانستان عبر إيران وتدخل إلى العراق، ثم قسم منها يستهلك في العراق وقسم منها يتحول إلى دول الجوار ومنها السعودية، المملكة العربية السعودية ودول الخليج الأخرى، بدون أن يكون هناك تعاون أمني بين هذه الدول. ويعني وحاولنا أن نطرق الأبواب كثيرا، للأسف الشديد بسبب هذا التجاذب وبسبب هذا الاختلاف لم نتمكن، وبالتالي العراق يدفع ثمن كبير بسبب هذا الملف. وناهيك عن أمور أخرى مثل غسيل الأموال، مثل عصابات الجريمة المنظمة، وحتى داعش يعني تجد لها موطئ قدم في هذه الدول وتأثيراتها على العراق بسبب عدم وجود اتفاق. طبعا أنا باعتباري يعني مسؤول أمني أتحدث عن الجانب الأمني. إذا دخلنا الجانب السياسي، تأثيراته السياسية وتأثيراته الاقتصادية كبيرة جدا. فنعم، أنا أعتقد أنه هذا الاتفاق سيكون له أثر كبير على الوضع الأمني والاستقرار، وربما أبعد من ذلك على الوضع العراقي. شكرا جزيلا.
So we're about to finish. Sarhang, you had your hand up, so please. But remember, they want to eat lunch.
Yes, no, definitely. I don't want to get into trouble because of that. But I don't want to add to, I think it is a positive development, the deal between Iran and Saudi Arabia. I think we can, hopefully it will get implemented and we can bank it in the change of mindset, in the addition to the capital of peace in the region. if it stops attacks on Saudi Arabia and lets wind down the war in Yemen, if it helps with the arms in this country not to be feeling threatened and directed into the region, these are all positive developments. It can definitely have positive dividends. The Omanis will say we started this, but I think the Iraqis will have added to it, but I think everybody's happy that it got done for the sake of peace, that it got done. But I think there is also open questions. That's my last comment on this. The context of this is matter. Yes, we see de-escalation between Syria and Turkey, so there's a spirit of de-escalation in certain ways. But also there's a certain pieces of other added pressure. So the Kurdistan region was on the receiving end a few months ago of missiles, not too far from here again, Turkish attacks increasing. So will these actors who de-escalate with bigger powers, will they looking for weaker links where they will apply pressure? I think that is an open question. Second, so the Kurdistan region could brace positively for positive dividends, but it can also have a scenario where Iran may use the weakest link as it sees it and apply pressure. So we'll see. But the other piece too is that also is happening in a context where the region, the international community has been seeing Iran expanding for years into Iraq, into Syria. They were there in Lebanon for a long time, in Yemen. Where will this spirit stop? Will this spirit stop of this de-escalation at slowing down Iran as these people have been seeing it? Or will it lead to stopping Iran from expanding? Or will it lead to actually Iran rolling back as it builds positive relationship with these countries? So that's an open question. And I'll stop here.
Well, I know we're about to really... Joe, can you keep it very short? Very short.
Sure. Very, very shortly. Of course, the regional implications and consequences of the deal, I think, are enormous. This is a relatively big game changer. Two caveats. The first one is that this deal is also producing some spoilers in the region and outside the region. So we have to expect certain maybe complications to come and certain dirty tricks, quote unquote. Second, relatedly, this deal could also fuel the big power competitions again in the region, whereby the US could see let's say, the intrusion of China in a very strong way now as a sort of red light alert and maybe engage the region again in a deadly polarization. I hope this won't be the case, but we have to keep this in mind also.
Well, I think let's end it on the basis of hope, because the truth of the matter is, just listening to this panel, we heard about the promise of youth in the future. We heard about the promise of reintegrating ISIS, Daesh people. We heard about the promise of security inside Iraq and the promise of security throughout the region. And we heard about maybe coming up with creative ideas to reconcile different parties inside the KRG. Now, that's a pretty good feeling for me. And I would like to thank my good friend, Dr. Barham, for being the father of all of this. I would praise the university, and of course our president, but I have to warn you, I'm a trustee of the university. So so you can choose to say that I'm just saying nice things about the university, but I can tell you that the reason I became a trustee was precisely because this university has tremendous promise in terms of values, in terms of educational content, and frankly, in terms of what many of us would hope the future of Iraq and the KRG looks like. So I thank you all for your time, and now let's eat lunch.